All right, these are your notes on ecosystems and restoration ecology, chapter 55, and then parts of 56. Ecosystem is the sum of all the organisms living in a given area and the abiotic factors that they interact with. Remember, those means those are the non-living things. Boundaries are not always exact. That's what's determined by ecologists. An ecosystem can be many different things depending on where they determine those boundaries to be. An ecosystem could be a very small area or a very large area. Let's kind of go back a little bit. These are actually physical laws. We did a little bit of this when we talked about enzymes. Let's just kind of remind ourselves because it comes into play when we talk about energy transfer. The first law of thermodynamics is that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. The amount of energy stored in inorganic molecules must equal the total solar energy intercepted by the plant minus the amounts reflected and dissipated as heat. So amount of energy stored in organisms must equal the total solar energy intercepted by the plant minus the amounts reflected and dissipated as heat. We're going to have to do some math here with that in a little bit. Energy conversions are inefficient. Much of it is actually lost as heat. We're going to get into something called the 90-10 rule here in a little bit that actually talks about that. The law of conservation of mass is that matter cannot be recycled or cannot be created nor destroyed. It can, however, be recycled. Unlike energy, chemical elements are continually recycled or recycling through the ecosystem. So here what we're talking about is carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, hydrogen, oxygen, which make up water. Let's talk a little bit about trophic levels. Autotrophs are what ultimately support the ecosystem. Those are our primary producers. The main ones are plants, algae are some of them, and then we have some photosynthetic bacteria that also can be a part of the producer group. Chemosynthetic, these are organisms that don't use sunlight, but they use organic compounds in their environment to create their own energy sources. This is really important in the deep ocean because down there is not enough sunlight getting to the organisms for there to be autotrophs. So our primary consumers are herbivores that eat the primary producers, so the plants. The secondary consumers are the carnivores that eat the herbivores, which are the primary consumers. The tertiary consumers are the carnivores that eat the other carnivores. They usually eat the secondary or the primaries. And then I always struggle with this word. Detritivores, or the decomposers, get energy from the detritus, which is the non-living organic matter. So basically, decomposers are things like maggots or worms that live on, or bacteria even, or fungus. They live on dead stuff, or live on organic matter, or oftentimes dead things, and they break it down and absorb those nutrients. Oftentimes, these guys are also eaten by consumers. Two important groups, you have bacteria and fungi. They secrete enzymes that digest the organic material. Then they absorb the breakdown products. They play a critical role in recycling matter back to the primary producers. That would be the plants. So they're important in recycling nutrients back to the soil. Very nice, lovely picture of the mushrooms. So this is kind of how the energy flows, and then how chemical cycles are matter cycles. So the energy from the sun is given to the primary producers. That passes on 10% to the primary consumers, which passes on 10% to the secondary, which passes on 10% to the tertiary. And then these guys are going to give energy to they're gonna die basically and be organic matter, and then the decomposers are going to take energy from them. They're also going to give back some nutrients. The nutrients you can see in the blue here, that's the things that are nutrition. The nutrients, they call it chemical cycling. You can call it matter cycling or nutrient cycling. And then you can see that is, it's not working. I'm just going to write nutrient. That's cycling through the ecosystem, whereas energy is just flowing. There's no recycling because you don't give energy back to the sun. Most of the energy is dissipated as heat. So we say that energy is lost, but it's not really lost. It is just transferred to heat because remember, we can't really actually lose it. Primary production, the amount of light energy converted to chemical energy, which is the organic compounds like simple sugars or complex sugars, by autotrophs during a given time period. We usually measure this energy in joules. 1 joule is equal to 0.239 calories. Only about 1% of visible light that strikes photosynthetic organism is converted to chemical energy. So energy transfer is actually really not that great. The sun has a lot of energy, but only 1% of it is being converted to those organisms, those plants that are using it. The gross primary production is called the GPP, is the total primary production of an ecosystem. The net primary production is NPP, and this is the autotrophic respiration. Not all energy is stored in primary producers because they need to use some to do cellular respiration. On average, the net is about a half the gross. Net primary production can be expressed as energy per unit area, per unit time, or in biomass. That's the dry mass of life per unit area, per unit time. And we'll do some calculations of this later on. This just shows the net primary production across the globe. You'll see that primary production is really good right here. Very, very little production levels here. Not very much in the oceans either, especially in deep oceans. Near the shoreline, it's a little better. Not much going on there. So you'll see that there are some areas here where there's a lot of productivity. Net ecosystem production, and EP, is the measure of the total biomass accumulation during a time. This is the GPP, the gross primary productivity, so it's the plants, minus the total respiration of all organisms in the ecosystem. That gives you the net ecosystem production. Because you have to think about the plants are the primary source of energy because it came directly from the sun, but you also have to take away the respiration of the organisms because you're not going to be using that. That's no longer usable. Most common way to estimate the NEP is to measure the net flow of carbon dioxide or oxygen energy or leaving energy. That's not to say energy, that's to say internal. Sorry, or leaving the ecosystem. On land, typically you measure the carbon dioxide. In oceans, researchers can use both. They can use dissolved oxygen or they can use carbon dioxide. Energy transfer. Secondary production is the amount of chemical energy in the consumer's food that is converted to their own biomass during a given period. Production efficiency is the percentage of energy stored and assimilated. Total energy taken in, not including the loss of feces used for growth, reproduction, and respiration. Food that is not used for respiration. So productivity efficiency is a percentage of energy stored and assimilated food that is not used for respiration. Energy transfer. Birds and mammals typically have low production efficiencies, 1 to 3%. They spend a lot of energy to maintain their body temperature. Remember, we're homeostasis. We have to actually use the energy to maintain that homeostatic balance. Fish, the production efficiency is around 10%, and insects and microorganisms, it's a little bit higher. So this just shows that you have to kind of account for all of the energy. So if the plant material is eaten by the caterpillar, there's 200 joules of energy there. 100 joules are going to go into feces that is not assimilated. It's not actually being part of the organism anymore. 33 joules are going to go to growth. That's your new biomass, your secondary production level. So this is actually what's going to make the caterpillar the caterpillar. And then 67 joules are going to go to respiration. And these are going to be assimilated because they're going to be used in the ecosystem. Trophic efficiency is the percentage of production transferred from one trophic level to the next. Typically about 10%, but it can range from 5 to 20 depending on the type of ecosystem. This means about 90% of energy is not transferred from one level to the next. It's used up for life, or it is transferred to heat loss. You may remember that from Bio 1. Inefficient transfer results in a limit to how many trophic levels an ecosystem can sustain. Usually you have no more than 4 or 5 levels. Typically the higher trophic level organisms have small numbers and are more vulnerable to extinction. Think about all the extinct organisms, or all the organisms you know that are on the endangered list. Those organisms are usually higher trophic level because there's fewer in number, so we have less options to lose those. And this shows an energy pyramid. So if this is the amount of sunlight, sorry.
Attention, will all Relay for Life participants please report to the football stadium.
Only about 1%.
All Relay Life participants, please report to the football stadium at this time.
Only about 1% is actually going to get into the primary producers. And then from there, you're going to have a 10% transfer each time. Some aquatic ecosystems have inverted energy and biomass pyramids, typically because the primary producers are consumed so quickly. So you might see something that looks like this. It's kind of flipped upside down, but it is less likely. Eating meat is a relatively inefficient way of trapping photosynthetic production. You have to feed the cow first, and the energy transfer from grass to cow is only 10%, and then the transfer from the cow to human is now 1% of the original energy, so it's not very efficient, which is why meat is more expensive than going to the store and buying bread or potatoes or carrots or anything else, because you have to account for that energy transfer. Worldwide, we could feed more people successfully by eating the producers. The human carrying capacity depends greatly on our diet and the amount of resources each of us consumes. I do still think steak tastes good, but realistically, if we want to feed more people, we're going to have to eat lower on the food chain. If we choose not to do that, then we're going to have to pay a higher price to eat higher on the food chain. The biogeochemical cycles, these are going to be your nutrient cycles. Nutrients are limited. We only have so many, and they have to be recycled to the ecosystem. We depend on the recycling of these nutrients for life. Two general categories, we have global and local. So we have gas, things that are recycled, like carbon, oxygen, sulfur, nitrogen. Those tend to be global because they cycle through the atmosphere, and so they can move around the globe. And then we have things that are more local, like phosphorus and potassium and calcium, because those don't have a gaseous form. So they're going to be kind of local to your area. So this shows reservoir A. Organic materials are available as nutrients, living organisms, in the detritus. Reservoir B, so we have fossilization here, and then that puts everything into this reservoir. Think about things that die and are decompressed and they're pressurized, and those turn into your fossil fuels. And then we burn those fossil fuels, and that puts them back up into the atmosphere, puts some of them into the soil and into the water. And then we have weathering and erosion that takes place that puts those back into the water and the soil as well. And we have sedimentary rocks being formed. So these are going to be kind of recycling through this this ecosystem. Pages 1 to 8, or 1, 2 to 8, and 1, 2 to 9 have pictures of the cycles and explanations. Check them all out. Here is the water cycle. You're probably pretty familiar with this. We do a little bit with transpiration, which is not really shown here, and that is the evaporation of water from plants. And we're going to do a little lab on that later this week. Here is the carbon cycle. And this shows lots of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that is a big issue with global warming. This is the nitrogen cycle. And the important thing here is these organisms here, what's happening in the ground, putting that nitrogen back into the soil to be used for plants because they need nitrogen to grow. Oh, sorry. This is the phosphorus cycle. And then, oh, I didn't have a sulfur cycle on here. I thought I did. Nope, I just don't have one here. Rates at which nutrients recycle in the ecosystem is variable and depends mainly on how fast things are decomposed. Decomposition depends on moisture, temperature, and nutrient availability. A tropical rainforest tend to have really high decomposition rates. We obviously have higher decomposition rates here in the summer than we do the winter. And this shows ecosystem types here, and then talks about the temperature and shows the percent mass that's lost with the mean temperature annually. So they did a little experiment here. Honestly, I'm going to skip over this because I don't remember that experiment. If you go to your textbook, you can read about the case study, nutrient cycling in the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest. Read this case study and summarize that in your notes. You can pause the video and do that if you want, or you can come back at the end and do it. All right, let's talk about restoration. So restoration ecologists are ones that seek to initiate or speed up the recovery of degraded ecosystems. Bioremediation is using organisms to detoxify the polluted ecosystems. Ecologists introduce these species and then harvest them to remove metals from the ecosystem. Biological augmentation uses organisms to add essential materials to degraded ecosystems. Examples worldwide of restoration projects are on these pages. I would like you to take a look at those and read them. Conservation biology integrates ecology, physiology, molecular biology, genetics, and evolutionary biology to conserve biological diversity. I don't remember what that was about. Probably about logging. How that's a problem. Biodiversity. Genetic diversity is the genetic variation within a population and between populations. You should know that now. Species diversity is the number of different species. We need to be concerned with the endangered and the threatened species so we don't lose them. Ecosystem diversity is the variety of ecosystems globally. So this just shows kind of a graphic of that. This is at the organism level, the genetic diversity, and then the species diversity, and then the community and ecosystem diversity. Biodiversity. Ecosystems purify our air and water. They detoxify and decompose our waste and reduce the impacts of extreme weather and flooding. Organisms and ecosystems pollinate our crops, control pests, and create and preserve our soils. Evidence suggests ecosystems rely on biodiversity to function. Human activities are reducing biodiversity, which means we are ultimately hurting our own survival. Threats to biodiversity. Habitat loss. Introduced species, non-native or exotic species, can disrupt species diversity. Maybe they're a predator to something, or they have a lot of predators. They probably don't have a lot of predators themselves, but they can be a predator, and that can be a problem to the things that already exist. Over-harvesting, when we take more than we can be replaced. This is a huge issue in the oceans with fish. Global change, these are alterations in climate, atmospheric, chemistry, etc. Acid precipitation, we did that very early in the year and talked about leaving excess CO2 into the water and what that does. Or excess carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. I don't remember. Go on. I don't remember that either. Put it on. Human impact. We'll discuss 4 main types of environmental changes that humans bring about. Nutrient enrichment, toxic accumulation, climate change, and ozone depletion. So nutrient enrichment. We remove nutrients from one part of the biosphere and add them to another. We have also added new materials not previously existing, and some of them are toxic. Nitrogen is the main nutrient lost through agriculture. Eventually, though, it leaches into the ground and ends up in water sources, as do many other things, contaminating water supplies and killing aquatic life. And that just shows an image, I think, of nitrogen along the coastal line. Toxins in the environment. We release many toxic chemicals. Many of them are synthetic, which means they're artificially made. Biological magnification chemicals become more concentrated higher in trophic levels because the biomass of any given trophic level is produced from a much larger biomass ingested from the level below. So top level carnivores are most affected. So the biological magnification idea here is that if these zooplankton have this much, then these fish have to eat a bunch of these. So that increases their parts per million is what ppm means. And then the lake trout are going to have to eat a whole group of these guys, which is going to increase their concentration. And then they're going to have to eat a couple of these guys, which is going to increase their concentration. And this is they're looking at one particular thing here, but this can happen with any kind of a toxin or a chemical. This actually happened with DDT. It was a chemical used after World War II to kill mosquitoes and agriculture pests. It was a pesticide. We found that DDT persists in the environment long after it's used. Accumulated in the tissues of large birds, which interfered with calcium deposition in their eggshells. And when they incubated their eggs, they broke and the reproductive rates declined. And this population, it was banned in 1971 because of these effects. She had something to do with that. Greenhouse gases and global warming. Since the Industrial Revolution, concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere has been increasing. The burning of fossil fuels and deforestation has caused this. FACTS-1 is a study that looks at how increasing CO2 levels might affect forests. We have found that although plants grow faster with increased CO2 levels, they are limited by nutrients, so although the increase in CO2 increases plant production, it does not do so as much as it was originally thought. Greenhouse effect is necessary for our world, or our world would be freezing. We have to have it. However, we have seen an increase in global temperatures, which interferes with life. The largest changes in temperature have been seen in the ice polar caps, where essential life may not exist during their summer anymore because of the ice melting, and they rely on that. Stabilizing CO2 emissions will require international effort and changes in personal lifestyles as well as industrial processes. We also need to reduce deforestation globally because remember, plants take in carbon dioxide, so if we're taking away the plants, we're just compounding the problem. Atmospheric ozone, this is a separate issue. Ozone is not the same thing as CO2. We are protected from UV radiation by the ozone layer, which exists about 17 to 25 kilometers above Earth's surface. We have increased the amount of ozone over time to O3. It's primarily from production of CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, chemicals once widely used in refrigeration and manufacturing aerosols. And that was a problem. And so there's a chlorine atom which combined with the O2, and that produced this harmful chemical which was creating a hole in the ozone. Ozone layer thickness went down drastically. It started to rise back up because we banned the CFCs. Most nations have reduced or eliminated CFC use, but what is left from years ago will still affect ozone for about another 50 years. Decreased ozone levels increase the intensity of UV rays reaching our surfaces, most notable at the poles. Some scientists expect increases in skin cancers and unpredictable effects on crops and natural communities. And here's a picture of 1979 to 2009. So there's a big issue there. All right, end show.